Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Vladimir Putin is an evil, satanic figure. We have a second Aleppo unfolding in Europe in front of our eyes. Aleppo, of course, where the dictator Assad destroyed the lives of tens of thousands, took the lives of tens of thousands. It became a genocide against his enemies in Syria. And Vladimir Putin is intent on doing the same, whatever he has to do to win. He's just an evil, satanic man. And I hope you are praying for Ukraine. I will bring you the updates on it. Let me go to the updates as of an hour ago. People ask me, how do I know what's going on? How am I doing breaking news? It's because I have the Financial Times and the Telegraph and the Times of Israel. And they are hours ahead. Okay, when my show comes on, it's early and our networks really haven't caught up yet, unless it's Jim Sciutto who's doing a heck of a job in CNN. For CNN from Kyiv or Fox News, we've got a couple of guys over there, Harrington and Yinks. They're just amazing. And now their shells falling on their head. I put on my Twitter account last night a ITV journalist from Great Britain as two massive bombs went off in Kyiv, and they hit the floor on the second one. So if you go to my Twitter account, you can see that. I follow the news of Ukraine via our European friends and our Israeli friends because they're ahead of the game. Russian forces have seized control of Kherson, third largest city in the Ukraine, and it's not been confirmed by the Ukrainian military. And the mayor of Kherson suggested that Putin's got half the city, but not the whole thing. Frontline cities were attacked all through the night. Kyiv hit with 4 huge explosions, 2 of which are on tape, which I told you about. I put over on my Twitter account. Russian forces are assaulting Kharkiv, of course. They're just battering it. They're killing people indiscriminately. They've encircled the port city of Mariupol. And on Wednesday, for the first time, Russia acknowledged heavy casualties during the campaign. They said that they'd had almost 500 deaths and 1,500 injuries. It's far higher than that. It's probably not the 6,000 that some Ukrainian outlets are reporting. Russia acknowledges heavy casualty as missiles rain on Ukraine is the headline from the Financial Times. The United Kingdom is going to seize the property of oligarchs hit with sanctions. So they're going to take 8 oligarchs. They're going to take all their houses and they're going to try not to pay them for it. That's fine, but that's 8 people. That's not going to do anything. The United States has to sanction oil and gas. Now, Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska, who I'm supporting for re-election Republican. Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, who doesn't need support because he's the most popular guy in America for stopping Build Back Better. They are getting together to say, look, it's going to hurt because Russia provides the world with 1/10 of the world's oil and gas, but we got to stop the export of Russian oil and gas. We have to sanction it. Good on them. Bravo. Yes, it will drive up the price we pay. There are 3 things that can happen. We can continue to buy Russian oil and gas, thereby fueling Putin's war machine and killing children and innocent people, destroying buildings, destroying the architecture, and an unprovoked invasion of a neighbor. We can continue to do that and just basically subsidize his war machine, become financiers of his cluster bombs on kids. Or we can sanction Russian oil and not produce anything and pay more at the pump. Or we can sanction Russian oil and turn open the supplies that North America holds in abundance for the world, drive down the price, and encourage our allies to do the same. But if we won't lead, they won't follow. And so we've got to do that. Please call your senator, your congressman, urge them to join in the Murkowski Manchin bill and sanction Russian oil. Joe Biden hasn't done anything first. In fact, we're getting ready to do a massive giveaway of America's national security in Iran, in a new Iranian deal, one that's incredibly insane. Leaked details yesterday began to come out of Vienna, and we are out of our minds if we do that. Out of our minds if we do that. Hey, Dwayne, I've got no clock up here. There we go. Now I can see it. Vladimir Putin is set to cut Ukraine in 2 as the key city of Kherson falls to Russia. The Telegraph reports. The Wall Street Journal's editorial, Russia's assault on Ukraine city. And it brings up Srebrenica, Aleppo, Grozny. These are names etched in historical infamy as massacres conducted by marauding Serbs, Syrians, and Russians. As his troops surround and bomb Ukraine city, Vladimir Putin seems intent on adding Kharkiv, Mariupol, Kyiv, and more to that bloody and shameful list. For the average Russian, according to the Wall Street Journal, Western sanctions over the Ukraine war had begun to bite. Good. I have nothing against the Russian people, nothing at all. Rod Dreher has been online, man I respect a lot, saying we shouldn't just hate indiscriminately against Russians. I don't. But the only way to trigger regime change there, the only way to get Putin to stop is to collapse his economy. And we're doing a pretty good job on that. In fact, let me check the market. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on this Thursday morning, joined by Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister of Israel, member of the Knesset, expert on all things international. And Dr. Oren, good morning. Where do we find you this morning?
You find me recovering from like nonstop appearance on Israeli television. I caused some waves, and I'll tell you about it.
Okay, go ahead. You have the floor.
I'm not going to toot my own horn, but starting last week, I began to say that Israel's position was not tenable, not sustainable. The prime minister, the foreign minister had basically come out and said, this is a bad thing, but no one was going to condemn Russia. No one was going to cite Putin by name. No one was saying Israel was going to side with the United States and the West. And the reasons for this were clear. I mean, the idea is that Iran is trying to establish itself militarily in Syria. The Russian army's there. We have to coordinate with the Russian army in order to strike at Iranian targets. And we do it pretty much every night. And we've managed to go now 7 years with the Russians there without having any clash with them, which is saying something. So there's a strategic interest. My position was that Israel's relationship with the West, with the United States, is also a strategic interest. It's not just being nice. And beyond that, you cannot have a democratic Jewish state that sits by idly and watches another democratic state fighting for its freedom. And by the way, a fight that's being led by a very proud and pro-Israel Jew. We just can't sit on the side and do nothing. And I think that my position, at first I took a lot of heat for this. I didn't.
Well, Bennett is coming your way. The prime minister is coming your way this morning.
Coming my way. And he has to. And
now, Michael, I got to ask you, that's good. Yeah. I am more concerned about not seeing Israel's reaction to the leaks about the Vienna talks, where Russia is mediating our collapse, America's collapse before Iran. Have you seen those reports?
I have, and they're shocking. They're shocking, and they've left me just almost stunned. They're talking about lifting sanctions on known terrorists, basically a total collapse of the American position. I don't get it. Does America now appear on the stage with Russia and announce the lifting of sanctions against the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, a state that has murdered hundreds of Americans? You do that while you're putting sanctions on Russia? I don't get it. Do you?
3 years ago, the United States killed, or 2 years ago, Soleimani. And in response, he's an international war criminal terrorist. They fired ballistic missiles at our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines at the Assad base. One of them was my son. And so I'm kind of personal about it. I do not understand why we allow Iran to fire missiles and kill Americans, and then we do a deal with them. I just don't get the American position. They are our enemies. They are our mortal enemies.
It's not just that. It's by not responding to that rocket fire, by giving in to the Iranians. What do you think Putin was thinking? He's taking notes.
Oh, yeah. What do you think China's thinking as they watch the Ukrainian and the world response to the Ukrainian resistance?
I think Putin took notes both on America's conduct of its relations with Iran, also on the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and concluded that he could get away with conquering the Ukraine. And God knows what the Chinese are concluding right now.
Now, does Israel buy Russian oil, Michael?
No.
Well, that's good, because the United States buys a lot of it, which is just insane for us to run around taking oligarchs' yachts and not sanction their oil and gas.
Yeah, listen, we have. It's not that there's not a wellspring of pro-Russian feeling here, but you have to distinguish between pro-Russian and pro-Putin's feeling. Between 1 in 7 and 1 in 5 Israelis speak Russian. We have probably per capita largest Russian diaspora anywhere in the world. People are very patriotic. They love Russia, but Putin, no. There's not a lot of feeling in favor of Putin.
Well, they would love regime change, wouldn't they? They would love regime change, like the Iranians who live in the United States. They would love to get rid of the Ayatollah.
And by the way, with Ukraine has a very established tradition of anti-Semitism. Some of the greatest and some of the most egregious acts of anti-Semitism in all history took place in Ukraine. Whether you know or not, I also worked underground in the Ukraine in 1981. I was sent by the Israeli government to work with the Jewish underground in the Ukraine. And these are people who were very, very brave. They're all going to be arrested and sent to Siberia. And I was arrested repeatedly by the Ukrainian KGB and interrogated at length. The Ukrainian KGB made the Russian KGB, look like teddy bears.
Well, you don't want Ukrainians mad at you, and you don't I just don't imagine that the resistance will go away unless he conquers the entire country.
They don't have to. Problem is, they don't have to conquer the country. They have to only conquer a couple of cities, particularly the port cities. And I think that's what he's going on. But I think the longer that the Ukrainian people hold out, first of all, it'll impact Israel's position. It'll impact America's position. I would wager that the United States would join the Europeans in providing ammunition, military equipment to the Ukrainian resistance, and then we're a different ballgame.
Well, thank you for being a voice of reason on Israeli news, because I have been mystified by Prime Minister Bennett. Just absolutely mystified by what's going on there. Now you explained it. Deconfliction is an important thing in Syria and Lebanon, but that doesn't trump the leveling of cities. It just doesn't.
I agree with you.
Dr. Oren, follow him on Twitter, Doc Dr. Michael Oren, Dr. Michael Oren. Come back next week. Someone will be sitting in for me while I'm on vacation, but they'll look forward to talking to you. Don't go anywhere, America. Come right back, except over to Food for the Poor at HughHewitt.com. You can't help those kids in the subway, but you can help the same sorts of children in desperate situations in Haiti and around the Caribbean. If you'll simply go to HughHewitt.com, hit that Give Life button at the top. It's a great way to observe Lent. I'll be right back. Hour 2 straight ahead. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The war rolls on. Martial law imminent in Russia. I'm joined by Representative Mike Gallagher on the House Armed Services Committee, on the House Intel Committee as well. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome. Normally we have a little fun about football, but this is not a time for fun. Putin is just an evil tyrant like Assad, like Xi, and we are buying his oil. Why are we doing that?
Well, it's even worse, Hugh. Not only are we buying his oil, but all of these sanctions that were announced, for example, sanctions on the Russian central bank. My understanding is there is a big fat loophole, the size big enough that you could drive a Russian tank through, that still allows them to process payments for oil, for energy. There's just a massive misunderstanding about the level of sanctions we put on the regime. And the fact is, Russia's economy is so dependent on energy. That's how money gets into the country, that unless you sanction the energy industry, then you're not actually having the massive effect on Russia that the Biden administration is telling us they're having right now. I don't understand it. I don't understand also why there's not a crash program to unleash the true power of American energy in order to help our European allies. Now, that's not something you can do overnight. It's going to be the work of a few years. You need regasification facilities in Europe if we're going to continue to ship LNG. But we have that natural resource. We have the innovation and ingenuity. What we need is better policy, both here and from our European allies, to make that possible. And over the next 5 years, I think it's possible we could wean Europe entirely off Russian gas. And that would be a massive geopolitical win for us, for them, and a massive geopolitical loss for Putin. But this administration, I fear, Hugh, just remains captive to the climate left. That's what it is. When you dig underneath all of it, it is the almost religious climate change evangelist movement that brooks no dissent, whose chief priest is John Kerry, who has a special role in this administration, with 100 staffers in Foggy Bottom working out of George Marshall's old office. Tell me how that makes sense. It does not at all, and it's doing serious damage to our geopolitical position right now.
Let me play for you an exchange between Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, appeaser-in-chief. She negotiated the 1994 appeasement of North Korea. She negotiated the 2007 appeasement of Iran. Her people are in charge of the unfolding appeasement of Iran, a second time being accomplished through Russian agents in Vienna. And she was before the House subcommittee with Brian Mast yesterday, and she said this in exchange to his question, in response to his question, cut 14.
Should Europe and the West divest, Western Europe and the Western world divest of Russian energy, in your opinion?
I think that there's a lot of rethink, and there will be, about energy security worldwide. I think you have...
Okay, stop right there. Mike Gallagher, this is Aspen Institute nonsense. I first met Wendy Sherman at the Aspen Institute in my one time there. I'm never going back. It's just a left-wing wake for the JCPOA, and it's gone completely off the rails, like a lot of cable, like a lot of Beltway news. And they are in the grip of this climate absolutism, but it doesn't make any sense. They want a carbon tax. They want to raise the cost of oil and gas. If we sanction Russian oil and gas, it will do that. So I don't understand why they are opposed to it, except they are opposed to the use of Western power on anything.
Because the climate evangelists have done something very clever in the last 2 decades. They've sort of wrapped themselves in all this rhetoric about climate change and the need to save the world from imminent extinction, while advocating policies that hurt Americans, and yet all they do is outsource their emissions to countries like Russia and China. The same is true of the climate left in Europe. The same is true of all the ESG evangelists on Wall Street. They just advocate for policies where they don't have to see the environmental consequences of their actions. They're just giving a massive economic gift to countries like Russia and China, who I guarantee you, Hugh, don't give a lick about the environment. The other thing about Wendy Sherman is, I mean, that was an easy no, by the way. Just say, no, we don't want to be dependent on Russian oil and gas. I'm glad you mentioned the Iran angle, Hugh. I don't think most Americans still understand that at the same time we are trying to deal with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and patting ourselves on the back because the Ukrainians are bravely fighting to the death despite robust American support, we are reliant on the Russians in Vienna to negotiate the revival of the JCPOA. Actually, we shouldn't even call it the JCPOA, because this deal will actually be worse than the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran deal. And I would invite your listeners to think about this in a few ways. One, it will be a massive gift to Russia. Russia wants to sell uranium and weapons to Iran. Russia is fine with Iran having a dominant role in the Middle East, threatening our allies, be they the Sunni Arab Gulf states or Israel. So point one, if we revive the Iran deal, we will be giving Russia a massive gift. Point two, as I mentioned before, compared to the 2015 deal, this will be much, much worse. I guarantee you they're going to propose removing sanctions on Iran that have nothing to do with their nuclear program and everything to do with their support for terrorism and their ballistic missile program. We're going to propose giving Iran billions and billions of dollars on the front end, even though all of the so-called sunset provisions in the deal, most of them are already in the rearview mirror, and the last important one expires in 2025. And we have a new regime in Iran that's even more hardline than the previous regime, Hugh. So this is going to be an absolute disaster, and the president is going to squander whatever bipartisan goodwill he has on foreign policy related to the stiffening of the West on Ukraine, and the fact that people are waking up to the fact that there are bad guys in the world, and we have to stand up to those bad guys. I cannot emphasize enough how disastrous this Iran deal will be to U.S. foreign policy and the direct connection to our feckless posture vis-a-vis Russia in Ukraine. It is all connected in my mind, Hugh.
I do not mean to deride anyone, but I have got to be extremely critical of Wendy Sherman. The 2015 deal is only the second one. She also did the 1994 deal with Korea, and she is now in charge, number 2 at the state. I am reminded of Tom Wolfe. This is written before you were born, probably, Congressman. Tom Wolfe's Radical Chic and Mau-Mauing the Flag Catchers. The climate absolutists are the Vietnam protesters of the 1960s. After they started the war, they left and opposed it. The climate absolutists don't care about anything except their positions at Aspen when the cognoscenti gather, or, I don't know, in the MSNBC green rooms, or in Manhattan. It doesn't make a lick of sense not to sanction Russian oil. What do you understand that you can tell us, and you're on Intel and Armed Services, about Russia's advance into Ukraine, and what the state of public opinion is in Russia that if we pushed harder on sanctions might grow even more difficult for Putin?
Well, I think what people need to brace themselves for is, despite the fact that due to the bravery on display from the Ukrainians, and it has been very inspiring, Hugh, I think Russian warship Go F yourself is a good rallying cry for the West. And Zelensky's leadership from the front is a good lesson for Western leaders who, how to deal with the crisis. Notwithstanding that, I mean, make no mistake, the Russian advance is continuing, and I don't think Putin is going to back down. He's going to go full Aleppo and Grozny on this situation. And so it's about to get much worse, and I would expect Russia to continue to take territory, albeit at a slower rate than they had anticipated, and ultimately demand that Zelensky goes, that they recognize Crimea, that they explicitly agree not to pursue NATO membership, as well as a host of other maximalist provisions for any sort of off-ramp diplomatically for this. So
now, Congressman, I got to break in with some breaking news.
Yeah.
Britain has called for a complete ban of all Russian banks from SWIFT, even if it curtails Russian gas exports. Now, I'll tell you, the lead from behind is back in Team Biden. They don't do anything first. We closed Russian airlines off last. We do everything last. We got the stingers last. Germany beat us with the resupply. Do you think we'll follow Britain now in closing off SWIFT to Russian banks that trade in gas exports?
I hope so, Hugh. But time and time again, this administration has turned half measures into quarter measures and invented creative reasons not to take action. The time is now. And this relates to the second part of your previous question, Hugh. I do think there is growing opposition to Putin's barbaric actions within Russia. So not only do we need to make this painful for him, and the way you do that is going after Russia's energy sector. That is indeed the only way you do that. I'm all for seizing the yachts of oligarchs, but it all comes down to Russia's energy sector. We also need to be in the business of harnessing that sentiment within Russia, using technology to truly capture that sentiment, AI-enabled technology, and then amplifying it, publishing it to the world, and making people understand, and making Putin himself understand what a precarious position he is in. There is still time to turn this to our advantage. Putin is going to occupy parts of Ukraine. I got that. That is a tragedy. We're going to be dealing with the humanitarian advantage. But over the long term, if a few things happen, we can look back and say that this was not a complete failure. The first and most important, in my mind, is to learn the lesson, which is that we need to arm Taiwan today, right now. There are dictators in this world that are willing to achieve their aims and take over countries by force. And the biggest one is Xi Jinping, and his biggest target is Taiwan. And you can't try and send arms to Taiwan after things start going boom. It needs to happen now, today. Lesson one. Lesson two, and related, we need to invest in our own defense. We're patting ourselves on the back because we passed a resolution supporting Ukraine yesterday on the House floor. Where's the defense bill? Where's the defense increase? Where's the actual money for Ukraine, Hugh? We need hard power. Diplomacy, particularly hashtag diplomacy, and sanctions do not deter. It all stems from hard power. We need to back up our soft power with robust hard power. That may actually be the most important lesson over the long term. And the third is, when you have allies on the ground that are willing to fight, like the Ukrainians have shown, we need to back those allies. We need to be in the business of building combat credible allies and convincing our NATO allies to be more lethal. And if over the long term we can harden NATO's Eastern Front, that's a good thing. If the fact that Finland and Sweden are talking about joining NATO, these are all welcome developments, but at the end of the day, it comes down to robust American leadership. Our allies will follow only so far as we are willing to lead, and we are still not leading.
Eloquently put. We do have enemies. They are named China, Russia, and Iran. It's the new axis. And we cannot buy their oil, their natural resources. We cannot play in their games. We cannot negotiate with their killers. Congressman Gallagher, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter, @Rep Gallagher. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Former Senator Jim Talent joins me now. Senator, I do not understand why the President of the United States has not led sanctions on Russian oil. We are paying for Putin's war.
Well, I agree. But what we're seeing here, we should impose the sanctions. But what we're seeing here is the failure of deterrence by punishment, which is the use of economic tools to punish the aggressor. It's kind of hard to do that when you are economically dependent on the aggressor, isn't it?
Well, it would require us to raise prices here until production caught up. But we're not willing to do that. I don't know why. It serves the climate agenda. I want to play for you and then get your comment. Brian Mass asked a question of Wendy Sherman yesterday, cut number 14.
Should Europe and the West divest, Western Europe and the Western world divest of Russian energy, in your opinion?
I think that there's a lot of rethink, and there will be.
Okay, stop right there. No. Explain that to me, Senator. I just do not understand this. It's literally incomprehensible why even climate activists say no, keep using Russian oil and gas.
Yeah, well, what you've been saying is true. That when they say climate policy, people like Sherman, what they mean is higher energy prices and less reliable energy. Okay, that's what they mean by that. So what they'll say is we need to use renewables. It is, of course, impossible to support Western economies on renewables. We're not even close to it. So we're in a box. Now, we ought to impose the sanctions because we have a nation-state aggression here that threatens the stability of Europe and the security of the United States. But what if we had practiced deterrence by denial, maintaining sufficient hard power forces in Eastern Europe so that Putin was afraid he could not achieve his objectives? Well, we didn't do that because we wanted to save money, right? So what are the Germans spending now, in order to try and catch up?
100 billion, right?
100 billion euros, which is $110 billion. You know how much they saved every year by spending 1.5% instead of 2% in their GDP?
No.
They saved about $17 billion.
Oh, my gosh.
They saved a lot of money, didn't they,
And now they're spending it.
Yeah.
Because they have to, because they're scared.
They're spending 7 years' worth of what they saved in order to try and catch up, and they won't. If they had spent that money when they should have on the armed forces, and it's the same thing with us. We need now to spend very, very large additional sums on the armed forces. I just wrote a column about it. Maybe the Congress will force the administration to do it. But we would have saved ourselves a war, which is costing us enormous amounts of money. We would have saved all these lives. We'd have protected our security if we had spent sufficiently on the armed forces in the first place. And now we're going to end up spending more money than we saved. We sure saved a lot of money, didn't we?
Jim Talent, this is deja vu for me because in 1978, 79, and 80, I was at Richard Nixon's side at the Elba of America in San Clemente when Russia invaded Afghanistan after the Iranian Revolution, as Nixon saw the world making terrible mistake. And it was depressing. This is worse. We're about to surrender everything in Vienna again.
And we have the consolation of having warned them all these years about what would happen. Yes, the Vienna thing is it's totally inexplicable. I mean, we're simply going to give the Iranians enormous amounts of money. They're going to continue developing their nuclear weapons. I cannot understand any coherent view of foreign policy that would justify such a thing. And it's compromising us here as well because we need the Russians.
Jim, it's appeasement. It's a theory that was tried, which is give them everything they want and they'll go away. It doesn't work.
What's the definition of insanity,
Yeah.
Continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different result. That's what we're doing.
Okay, I am encouraged. The London Stock Exchange suspended trading in 27 companies just an hour ago that have ties to Russia. EN Plus, Sberbank, Gazprom, Lukoil, Polyus. The Europeans get it. They're threatened by this. They remember 1938 and 39. Why are we leading from behind? That's the last question, Jim. Take two. What happened in the mentality of the Democrats? John Kennedy boycotted Cuba with ships. That was a nuclear confrontation. We won't even sanction Russian oil.
I think you're going to see a fair number of Democrats, you already are, who will support these sanctions. I think they're afraid about driving up the price of gasoline at a time when the administration's already hurting in the polls because of the high price of gasoline, which is high because of what they did with Keystone and their regulatory policies and the rest of it. So you see one bad decision, narrowing the options you have available so that you then make other bad decisions. Yeah, I mean, that pretty much explains the Biden administration to this point.
And then you do a fan dance and release 30 million barrels of oil. That doesn't do anything. It's a fan dance.
And the gaslighting, to switch metaphors, in order to convince people that what is happening is actually not happening and it's not working. And politically, it's not working. But in the meantime, we're paying very high prices for gasoline, and we have a war from an invasion from a country on whom our allies, at least, we are dependent, and our allies are very dependent. Yeah, this is great policy.
And we're financing that war.
Yeah.
Americans are financing the destruction of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, the devastation of civilians and children. We're paying for that because Joe Biden won't sanction their oil. Jim Talon on Twitter, at Jim Talon, got the best Twitter handle in America. It's pretty easy to remember. Go and follow. Read his National Review column. He's here every week, and I appreciate that, Jim. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt on this Thursday morning. The breaking news, of course, the London Stock Exchange has suspended trading in 27 companies with strong ties to Russia, including Gazprom. The United States stock exchanges should do the same thing. Martial law is pending in Russia, and Ukraine continues to be flattened. I'll bring you breaking news as it happens. I am, however, continuing to keep an eye on American politics. Texas voted overwhelmingly red on Tuesday night. And Arizona is going to do the same thing. We just don't know who the nominees are going to be to stand up against Mark Kelly in the Senate and for the retiring vacancy in the governor's office in the desert state when Doug Ducey, America's finest governor, steps down. One of the people who impressed me a lot when I went over to moderate the debate, I'm not taking sides, but I'm saying she did impress me a lot, was Karrin Taylor Robson, who is running for governor there. Good morning, Karrin. Good to have you on the program. Please introduce yourself to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. Thank you for having me on. And yes, we have a robust primary, so to speak, in Arizona to replace Governor Doug Ducey. I'm an Arizona native, lifelong Republican. I'm a mother of 4, which is probably my most important job to date. But I had the honor and privilege of working for Ronald Reagan as my first job out of college. I then went on and worked for 2 governors before going to law school. And for the last almost 30 years, I have been in the private sector helping people navigate government. I've been sitting on the other side of the table from local government, state government, and federal government, working on land use issues. And my experience with the federal government was up close and personal. Spent 10 years going back to Washington, probably once a month, and I know firsthand that Washington D.C. is broken. And, I'm running for governor because governors matter. If COVID taught us anything, Washington's broken. Governors and red state governors matter and make a huge, huge difference. And, of course, Arizona being on the front lines of what is now a 50-state border war, we get a disproportionate share of the impacts of the disaster of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Karrin Taylor Robson, your parents didn't do you any favors when they gave you a name for politics. Karrin, yeah. Taylor Robson, Robson. It's Karrin, Karrin, the number 4, Arizona is your Twitter hashtag. So you've got to overcome that. On the other hand, you're business friendly. I did not know the answer when I asked the 4 candidates for governor, how many of you have signed the front of a paycheck? It appeared to me that you've had the most employees of anyone on that stage. Was I right when I listened closely? Did I get that correct?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a small business owner, and first I had a law firm that was a quite successful law firm. I sold it 15 years ago, went in-house with one of my largest clients, and then started my own business again. And it's a small business. My goal after leaving the law firm was to never have a bunch of employees, but rather serve a lot of people. And so I have led large teams of people working on various projects, and I've had responsibility as a member of multiple boards for huge enterprises. For example, the Arizona Board of Regents is a $6.4 billion enterprise that I've had fiduciary responsibility for. But you're right, I have signed the front and back of paychecks for an awful long time.
Do you expect Governor Ducey to endorse anyone in this race?
That's a question you'd have to ask Governor Ducey. He, of course, is sitting as the chair of the Republican Governors Association. His colleagues have seen his leadership skills. He has served Arizona well. If you look at the list of top 10 states within migration, Arizona is on that list. We're one of the fastest growing states in the nation. And the diversification of our economy under his leadership has been very robust.
As a former Californian who had to flee to Virginia, I saw a lot of my friends move to Arizona in the 8 years of the Ducey administration, and it's a hard act to follow. I think 4 great candidates have stepped forward, but I do think the value of the Ducey endorsement is almost impossible to overstate, given what, a lot of people are quiet about this because Donald Trump doesn't like Doug Ducey very much. Doug Ducey likes Donald Trump. I don't get it. But I think Ducey has got extremely high approval within the Republican Party. Don't you?
As I go across this state, I would agree with you because at the end of the day, it's about the economy. And that's, when we look at what's going on at the federal level, people are becoming more and more attuned to the economy. Every time they fill their gas tank, every time they go to the store and try and buy a bottle of milk, it's the economy at the end of the day, because that's what everybody has to deal with. And on the economy, Governor Ducey has done a great job.
Well, the president on Tuesday night said, I've got a different answer for inflation. I'm not going to cut your wages. We need to cut your costs. That's actually impossible for anyone to do, but it's not impossible for state government to do. I believe you got a flat tax in Arizona now. That's one way to cut costs, is to cut people's taxes.
Yes. And Governor Ducey and our state legislature in their last legislative session did just that. And we are now on a glide path to have a flat tax.
There was a huge vote for school choice and against school closures in the Texas primary Tuesday night. What's the attitude towards school closures and choice for parents in Arizona?
Well, Arizona leads the nation. We have more students enrolled in our charter schools per capita than any other state in the nation. And more importantly, we now have open enrollment, and we have, I think, more than half of our students go to a school other than the one they're assigned, which tells me that, families care about choice in education. And so I plan to lead the way to give every family, every parent, the choice to send their kid to the school that best suits their needs. The one-size-fits-all school system of the past is a relic. It is a relic of the past. We can and we must do better, and Arizona will continue to lead the way on that.
Let's talk about the border. Would-be Governor Robson. There are two states. California is impacted, but Texas and Arizona are the most impacted. I would dare say Arizona probably more than anyone else, given the amount of drugs flowing into the desert state across the vast stretches of unprotected border. What can a governor do?
Well, there's a number of things that a governor can do. We could send more National Guard. We could surge our National Guard to the border. I plan to call an emergency session of our legislature on day one, because we've got to provide additional resources to our local law enforcement, our border sheriffs who are bearing the brunt of this. We can construct the wall. There's a lot of segments of our border where we can continue to construct the wall, and we will. And we'll utilize surveillance technology. A lot of people just think of a wall as just that, a wall, when in fact it's a whole system that includes fiber optics and sensor technology and drones. We have to deploy all of the technological means we can to secure the border. And I also intend to enter into a multi-state compact with other governors, because, as you just said, it's a 50-state war. When you look at, when the multiple times I've gone down there, and I'm going to go back down to the border again next week, it's a human tragedy. In addition to the national security concerns, of which there are many, the human tragedy that's unfolding with the human smuggling, the drug trafficking, the sex trafficking, we're going to be paying the price for this failure for generations. Fentanyl alone, these numbers are no secret. We've had enough fentanyl confiscated in the last year to kill every man, woman, and child in America. And people don't necessarily like it when I connect dots, but the precursor ingredients to fentanyl are coming from China to the Mexican cartels to a neighborhood near you. And rarely does a day or a week go by that I don't hear another story of a mother or a friend or a neighbor of somebody who has been impacted by a fentanyl overdose.
I know those stories myself, and I'm telling you, there is no more school closures, number one. Number two, opioid deaths. These are the domestic issues of our time. Inflation hits everyone as well, but in terms of salient issues motivating people, the opioid catastrophe is one of them. And I think you said funding for the State Highway Patrol, funding for the border sheriffs.
Correct.
That is, it's not defund the police, it's refund the police.
It's refund them. In fact, I've also been on record, any city in the state of Arizona that chooses to defund our police, I will defund. Any city that chooses to become a sanctuary city, we will use everything in our authority to defund them, period.
Karrin Taylor Robson, thank you. Keep coming back. All four of you great candidates. I look forward to that primary. When is the primary date, Karrin?
It is August 2nd.
Well, it'll be a long campaign. We'll talk to all four of you again. Thank you for joining our debate a few weeks back.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Karrin for Arizona, Karrin, the number 4, Arizona. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. When President Trump named Ambassador Robert O'Brien his special envoy for hostage affairs to become his national security advisor, Ambassador O'Brien invited me to visit him in the famed West Wing office occupied by Henry Kissinger and every national security advisor since then. And I walked in, and the lawyers, when I was in the Reagan White House, were never allowed in there. And so it was the first time I'd ever been in that particular office, been in the Oval and the Chief of Staff's office and all that, but never in that office. And there in the middle of all the chaos was my next guest, Alex Gray. On his right was Matt Pottinger, the Deputy National Security Advisor. On his left, Ambassador O'Brien in the famous office. And in the middle, directing traffic, Alex Gray, Chief of Staff at the National Security Council. He joins me now, a member of the American Security Group. Alex Gray, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Are you running for Senate in Oklahoma?
Well, thanks for having me on, Hugh. Look, I've been incredibly gratified by the number of people across the state who've reached out to me. I'm a fourth-generation Oklahoman. You know me, Hugh. I'm a national security guy. I'm not a professional politician. So, I'm giving this some thought. I'm going to be speaking to our former president, getting his advice. I look at the world that Joe Biden bequeathed by Donald Trump, and it's a world that we had energy independence, we had a military strength that was unsurpassed, we had our adversaries in a position where they knew that the United States would respond unquestionably with force and with strength if they chose to try and upend the global order. And we look at what's happened in the last year, and it's just been one foreign policy disaster after another. And I really, in that kind of environment, I am giving serious thought to the need to have people with substantial national security experience who are in the Senate, in Congress, who don't need training on day one.
Jim Inhofe is a great man, and he's a listener to this show, and he's been a guest many times, and he's stepping down early, and I salute him for that. Big shoes to fill on armed services and elsewhere. So, Alex Ray, run down your bio. First of all, are you a Baker Mayfield fan?
Well, I'm a OSU Cowboys fan.
Oh, no! I
know,
thought you were OU.
No, I'm a Cowboys fan, but everyone in Oklahoma is Hugh. We end up rooting for whatever Oklahoma team makes it farthest. So, I'm a Cowboys fan. Did my first year of college at Oklahoma State. Ended up spending the last decade or so working for some very good members of Congress. Got my start working for Congressman Tom Cole from Oklahoma.
Terrific
great
guy.
member,
Yeah.
And ended up 4 years in President Trump's White House. Ended up being one of the last with Ambassador O'Brien, two people to walk out of Donald Trump's West Wing. Ran his National Security Council kind of day to day, was responsible for when President Trump told Ambassador O'Brien, we need to shrink the NSC in half to make it more effective, more supportive of his mission. That was my lodestar, was to get that done, and we got the NSC to one of its smallest, most efficient sizes in living memory. And we were able to do some pretty incredible things under Ambassador O'Brien and most particularly under President Trump's leadership.
Now, we are entering an era of peril. We've been in an era of peril since 2001, since the holiday from history has been over, Alex Gray. During your time in the Trump White House, you were at the forefront of Iran policy. We're about to see the reversal of that. A disaster is brewing in Vienna that is not getting much attention because of the disaster, the humanitarian chaos in Ukraine. I will come back to Ukraine. What are we doing with the Iranians? Are we surrendering again?
Well, one of the things that President Trump did that was, I think, showed tremendous leadership and tremendous foresight was getting us out of the disastrous JCPOA. And, the Washington foreign policy establishment was adamant, Republicans and Democrats, that you can't get out of it. If you get out of it, it's going to be a disaster. Donald Trump listened to his instinct. He listened to great advice from a core group around him, and he kept his promise to the American people, and he got us out of it. And when he did that, he reset the order in the Middle East, and he created a situation by doing that I think directly led to the Abraham Accords, the most significant peace opportunity in the last 70 years in the Middle East. And I think what we're seeing now, the absurdity of the Biden administration condemning Russia, while at the same time trying to work with the Russians to reinstitute JCPOA in these Vienna talks. It's absurd. And only at the State Department, Hugh, could you have that kind of fake compartmentalization. It doesn't make sense. And the average American knows just the absurd nature of that effort.
Now, Alex Gray, if Donald Trump endorses you in Oklahoma for the Senate, that will be it. I believe the former president's popularity in Oklahoma is probably at 90%. It's a deep red state. It's like West Virginia. I don't think Donald Trump could get a motorcade through Oklahoma. People would show up and throng the streets so much. So what's he think?
Well, I would never presume to speak for the former president. He is the most popular person in the history of the state of Oklahoma. There's no state that's more loyal to President Trump. I will say, I would be incredibly honored if I did choose to get into this race, to have the former president's support. I've been very encouraged by the number of senior Trump administration officials who've reached out to me and encouraged me to look at running. Again, I'm going to seek the former president's advice and counsel before I make any decision. He's the one who really brought me into national politics. He let me serve in his White House for 4 years, and I have tremendous loyalty to him and to his agenda. And that's an agenda that I think many, if not most Oklahomans thoroughly embrace.
Now, Oklahomans also care about energy a great deal. And the Biden administration's war on energy coherence has now reached the point where we are not sanctioning Russian oil and we are sanctioning American oil. Would you work against that if you're elected to the United States Senate?
Hugh, Oklahoma is and has been for 100 years one of the centers of American energy production. I mean, Oklahoma led the way in the fracking revolution in the early 2000s. Oklahomans know instinctively the importance of energy independence and the absurdity of the radical environmental attack that's been perpetrated by the Biden administration. Oklahomans, just in their very core, understand that without the energy independence that Donald Trump was able to facilitate, we're weaker, not just weaker economically, but we're weaker on the world stage. And these regimes like Putin's Russia and the Ayatollahs in Iran, they're emboldened and they're given more freedom of choice. They're given the ability to upend regional and global order because we don't have the same leverage that we did under President Trump on the energy space. And so I would be working, if I did enter this race and I was lucky enough to be elected, I'd be working every day to try and go back to the winning formula of Donald Trump on energy independence.
I believe American energy production is down almost 10% in 1 year after President Trump left. I can't even believe that Team Biden has done this because now we have, I think we're financing this war, Alex Gray. Money is fungible. Energy is fungible. If we're buying Russian energy, we're putting money into Putin's pocket and he's using it to kill civilians in Ukraine. It works that way. I do not understand. I want to play for you Wendy Sherman, Appeaser-in-Chief, Deputy Secretary of State, at the congressional hearing yesterday with Brian Mast, cut number 14. Computer froze. She was asked directly, should we sanction Russian oil, divest? And she said no. What's your position on that, Alex Gray? Uh-oh.
It's not a complicated situation. Russian oil is facilitating Russian dominance. It's facilitating Russian dominance in Eastern Europe in the predation that they're engaging in against Ukraine. And what I think most people in the United States, and particularly in Oklahoma, understand to be absurd is that we have the natural oil and gas reserves in this country to be energy independent for the rest of the 21st century and beyond. And that gives us the ability to chart a foreign policy that doesn't require the type of interventions that so many Americans have rejected. It's that very energy independence that gives us the foreign policy leeway and leverage to avoid the type of foreign entanglements that the American people have rejected. So I think there's no higher priority than whatever you want to call it. We have to have the Keystone Pipeline put back. We have to immediately expand our opportunities for drilling. We have to open up leases, whether it's in the Gulf, whether it's across our Alaska. We have to immediately make energy independence one of our highest national security priorities. And the Biden administration really doesn't have a moment to lose.
Now, I want to close, Alex Gray. By the way, what's your timetable? When do you have to decide by?
We have a pretty short time period. We're going to have to make a decision early April. But I expect to hopefully get input from the former president and to take more soundings from across the state and make a decision relatively soon.
All right. You were, like the president, ahead of the crowd on China. You have been pushing for the pivot to the Pacific for a long time. You're actually big on the Pacific Islands strategy. Would you explain to people how you came to be aware of the menace that is the Chinese Communist Party?
Hugh, I wrote my first article on this in National Review in 2010, saying that the Chinese Navy was the greatest threat that the United States has faced in the sea power domain since World War II. And I think the last 12 years have only borne that out more. And look, when I was so honored to work for President Trump in his White House, one of the things that I was tasked with doing was taking a look at the impact of China on our supply chains and on our industrial base. And we went back and we did the first ever detailed study of the effect of unfair trade and unfair competition on our industrial base. And we found that the Chinese and the Russians and other adversaries had created significant gaps in our industrial base. And President Trump signed a historic executive order. I was pleased to stand right next to him when he did that. And we really made a huge effort, and this is something I think that Oklahomans appreciate as a huge military state. We made a tremendous effort to go and try and fill those gaps to make sure that our industrial base is the envy of the world, and that China, Russia, Iran, North Korea are never going to be in a position of leverage over us. And we're able to deter and prevent actually having to use military force.
It was a terrific record on China in the Trump White House, and it'll be interesting to see how the visit to Mar-a-Lago goes. Jim Lankford is a friend of the show, and Senator Lankford will be reelected. You'll be running for the open seat. Are there, just a technical, do we have any other declared candidates yet?
My understanding is we've got a couple. We've got former Speaker of the House, T.W. Shannon. I understand he's looking at it. I know we've got Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen. I think there's some other folks who are looking at it, and I think it's Senator Inhofe has big shoes to fill, and I think there'll be a lot of folks who are looking at the opportunity.
I will look forward to hearing what the result is. Alex Gray, keep coming back. I appreciated your piece in the Wall Street Journal with Ambassador O'Brien last week. I appreciate your coming on. You're going to have to get on social media if you do this, Alex.
I've been resisting it for a long time, Hugh. But,
you'll need Gray for Senator, something like that, and Gray for Oklahoma or something like that. But thank you, my friend. Good luck in Mar-a-Lago. Say hello to the former president for me.
Thanks, Hugh. I appreciate it.